Hello, Amplify teachers. We all know you all have a lot going on right now. Some of you have just started transitioning into remote teaching, and some of you are over a week or two in. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day for this webinar. I'm Maggie, and I'm on the marketing team at Amplify. Many of us have interacted in the Amplify Science Facebook group, and if you're not in our group yet, please take a moment after our webinar to join. It's a really great resource for finding community amongst other Amplify teachers, as well as a place to get some fun or inspiration for teaching Amplify Science. And without further ado, our second Amplify educator, Andy Devivo.
Hi, everybody. My name is Andy. I teach in Chicago, Illinois at a K-8 elementary school. My specialty is math and science, and do about an hour of math and 45 minutes of science every day. It's my third year with Amplify. Was teaching interactive science and other curriculums before that. And yeah, I'm excited to share a little bit of my experience with you today.
Awesome. All right, so what does a week in the life look like for you, including like planning and prep time?
Yeah, I think, so this year I made a bit of a switch in my planning in terms of how I'm kind of looking at a unit. So basically, I'll outline the whole unit at the start and essentially like prepare all of the materials for every chapter at the start of the unit and have them kind of at least a sample of each one ready. So that kind of gives me less time in terms of sorting through the materials and figuring out those during the week. But each week I kind of review my plans. At the start of the unit, what I use to prepare myself is the flow chart, which is on the Amplify like unit page, if you're not familiar with that. And I've noticed that as I've kind of been going through new units, I switched from third to fourth and had to learn all those units as well. The flow chart is what kind of gives me like a big picture of unit questions, chapter questions, investigation questions, and kind of the path that that I'm going to take to teach those. It feels like most weeks I'm so focused on the investigation question with students that it's good to have that flow chart at hand so I can kind of think about like what is the bigger picture that we're all trying to get to eventually. And so I would say then just like on a daily basis, what I'm looking at is the 3 dimension of the NGSS. So while I have my weekly plan, then I'm thinking in today, what is this lesson going to hit? What DCI, what disciplinary core idea do I have to hit? What is the practice that we're using in this lesson? And what is the cross-cutting concept that's going to tie it all together? So those are kind of, I guess I look at it as a whole unit, and then in a week, just breaking it down to the investigation question, and then on like a daily basis, looking at the 3 dimensions to kind of keep me focused on what the students have to learn.
I really love that you mentioned the flow chart. It's such a great tool for like really helping you map things out, which is literally in the name. But I think sometimes that might get a little overlooked when teachers get so overwhelmed by every little piece of the curriculum. And there's a very simple tool right there that kind of helps you out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like to me, it's like the way to get into the curriculum because, as you said, when I look on that first page, especially in a unit like I've never taught before, there's so many resources and it's so overwhelming to think, where do I even start? Especially if you don't have any science background in that topic. So it just feels like this is what we're doing. This is what the kids have to learn. And here's how we're going to get there. And then from there, diving in deeper and deeper and learning about the science, which is the fun part.
Awesome. So our next question is, how do you use and organize your materials?
Yeah. So what I like about, I wanted to get, yeah, so you can see the picture here. So one thing I've been working on this year is the materials are so great in Amplify. They're hands-on, the books are amazing. Like the word wall words are great and the key concept cards. But my first couple of years, what I would do is I would teach the unit or teach the activity. And then even, I think Amplify even says like, put away the materials in a neat way so like your kit is organized. And I think that's like so important to keep your kit organized, but at the same time, like leaving the materials out in a really organized way keeps the unit so alive for my students. So I have these little tables of like evidence tables, essentially what I call them. And they just kind of summarize, or they are the material from the activity. And that really enables the students to like interact with the materials in a much more realistic way than they would if it was just like activity, put it away. And it allows them to like make connections between the activities as well. I've seen kids when we're discussing something in chapter 3 go and grab something off of the evidence table from chapter 1 and like make that connection. This is just like this activity that we did. And they wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have the activity materials out there so they could see them and interact with them. So like, while it is important to keep your kit super organized, I do think finding a way to display them and finding like a helpful way to label them. I label them as like the activity in the order that we do it. I know Amplify has them as lessons, so could label them as like activity from lesson 1.3. Definitely depends on what your structure is like, but the kids know this is activity 2 from chapter 4, and they're able to interact with it in that way. Anything else I wanted to say there? Yeah, I think it's kind of like the big thing I feel like about the materials is just making sure they're available for students to interact with.
Yeah, I think it's great that you have this kind of board to display them on. It seems like our whole goal is to put the kids in the role of a scientist or engineer, and this kind of creates like a mini lab for them, like a little lifestyle for them to constantly be surrounded by the materials and what they're learning.
Yeah, and they love it. And you can even like, if you're having a student who's struggling with like a particular concept, like this was a unit for 4th grade where they have to describe the role of light and vision. And there's a lot of activities that it's just they need a picture to like prompt them to like remember what they learned, and you can just grab it and bring it to their desk and they can work on their explanation. They're like, oh, I remember, I'm good now. Just that like really quick thing, and it's already ready for them. So that's helpful.
Yeah, those little triggers.
Yeah.
Okay, so what kinds of struggles and successes have you encountered while using Amplify Science?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of connecting to the materials, I think I'll talk about struggles first. My first couple of years, it was about like I was having trouble with the pacing of the units because they are dense. There's a lot of different lessons and activities in it, and the lessons planned for an hour, and often like, as you know, like when you're in a rich discussion, the lesson might drag on for a little longer because you want to like allow the students to explore and to have that inquiry side. So some of my units were going a couple months, 3 months long. And so to ask a student to remember something from a chapter 1 when it was in September and now you're in, late November was very challenging for them. And so I think one thing I did do was create these evidence tables that allowed students to constantly have those memories of that activity. And then at the same time, in terms of pacing, which is always a struggle, I think, in teaching, it was to try and find ways to maximize like the important parts of the lesson. So the parts that had to be inquiry based, the parts that had to be student led and student discovered were the parts that I would spend more time on. And then finding a way to get those routines down quick so that when it was like, we're gonna do a shared reading now, we didn't have to go over the guidelines anymore to try and save time there. I think also writing is a struggle. There's a lot of writing in the Amplify curriculum, and I love that. It's extremely helpful to give students the practice. But my first few years with it, first couple of years, I was having a hard time seeing improvement in student writing. They'd be writing a lot, but it would be really about nothing, or they weren't providing evidence. And a lot of times the prompt, there's a couple of versions of the prompt I like in Amplify. They have the version B, which allows you to have a little bit more scaffolding in the writing, and then kind of a version A, which is just a prompt in lines. So I think that's a struggle for students who aren't used to like long scientific writing. But a couple of things I've done with that is this year I've worked on a lot of feedback. So giving students quick and specific feedback on their writing has just really helped them improve. And then providing, little sentence starters or graphic organizers definitely helps as well. And then in terms of success, I think student discourse, like Amplify provides that activity, that hands-on, the inquiry. And so enabling students to just talk about it and explore and share what they're observing and start making connections on their own, I think is a really awesome part of the curriculum. And then also making connections between like their observations and their scientific principles. So the key concepts that Amplify gives us, if you're able to kind of follow the curriculum as it's designed, but also sometimes hold something back a little bit and allow students to just make their own connections of what they're seeing and what they inherently know. A lot of times I've found students have been able to come up with those key concepts, which are essentially the disciplinary core ideas, on their own. And that, like, the power to see that happening is pretty awesome. So I think overall my classroom just feels, the students feel more like scientists with this curriculum. They take ownership over the problem. It's interesting. They're excited every day we get to try and solve it. And so that's been really awesome.
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned two different things. One, the different types of questions, which sometimes that we hear that teachers struggle with, like the repetitiveness. But then you kind of explain that the two different types of questions they serve different purposes, and that scaffolding helps one student where the maybe less scaffolding is good for a different student, and that those differences are really helpful for the higher level learners and lower level learners.
Yeah, and I think to speak to their repetitiveness, because yeah, I've noticed that too. And I think it's also like how you leverage that. So I found that, yes, I do have students who, like, in the first 2 lessons of a chapter can already explain like how it all works and can write their explanation. But then, like, using them as the discussion leaders, as the people who are helping students who don't yet understand, as students who can ask questions. And then that's pushing, not only their science and engineering practices that they have to work on for later grades, but they're also pushing their own understanding and their own explanation, which, while it is probably accurate, could still be better. So I think it's repetitive so that every student can access it, and just finding a way to challenge those students to access it quicker than others is something that's possible.
Yeah, and I like the other thing I like that you said was about, like, kind of holding some things back sometimes, because truly you're facilitating their learning process and doing like less direct teaching and really kind of helping them teach themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree.
So how has your science instruction changed since using Amplify?
Yeah, so to your last point that you just made, I think one of the things that I've really changed since I've started using Amplify is just the focus on student voice. So I would say before, when I taught science, like when it wasn't inquiry based and I had to provide the information and the students had to essentially repeat what I said on paper or speaking it, I was the person who had to speak a lot because I had to give the information. And now with Amplify, the students are engaging in the materials. They're like grappling with these questions they have. They're observing something and wondering what it might mean. And suddenly they're the ones who are having to do all the talking in science. I would say that in my classroom is probably about 80% student talk and 20% me. And I will propose a question and then they'll just go for it. And then I'll interject when I hear something that might be interesting that we could expand upon, or if I hear like a severe misconception that we have to like clear up real quick. But just by allowing them to do the activity first and explore and have these questions and wonderings, it really changes how it comes from like me, as opposed it really comes from them now. Like all of the learning and all of the connections and all of the science. And the other thing I would say is, because Amplify kits are so well prepared and they come with everything I need, it's really allowed me to focus more on science instruction and less on science preparation. So I don't have to go and figure out how I'm going to teach it. I don't have to go and like figure out where I'm going to get, 15 boxes and all these things that I would need to do the activity. Like, it's all there. I have to prepare a little bit of it, but I have to think about what do my students need to be successful in this activity? How can I support them? How can I push their learning? How can I have them lead this as compared to me leading it? And just giving me the time to think about how to teach science in a way that is more interesting for them and allows them to really engage with the material in a better way.
That's great. So I know this is a big part of your everyday life as a bilingual teacher. So how have you used Spanish materials to support your Spanish speaking students?
Yeah. So I teach bilingual classes. So my students, their native language is Spanish, and they are, they're all proficient in English at this point in fourth grade in my classroom. So I would say that we, in my school, we're pushing towards a dual language model. And so one thing that we are valuing is that students can, in science interact, and in math interact with both languages and really leave with not just a social Spanish, but also an academic Spanish. And so I've researched and tried to find different ways to use the Spanish materials to support my Spanish speaking students. They don't, at least this year, I have had people or students who've come into the United States, and we call them newcomers. So they need more direct Spanish instruction. But this year I mostly have students who don't know the words in Spanish. So what I'm doing this year and trying to support my students to really understand the material in both languages is I'll start the unit in one language, so usually English, and we'll go through an entire chapter in English, and then do a bridge where we'll go over a lot of the vocabulary words in English and Spanish, and then start the next chapter in Spanish. And it allows students to interact with the material in both languages, and a lot of them are more, I would say about 70% of my students are more comfortable in English and Spanish at this point. And so it's a challenge for them to interact with Spanish. A lot of their parents at home speak Spanish to them, but not in an academic setting. And so the writing is a challenge, but they're growing in it and learning in it. And so it's just very, very interesting to see them interact with both and to see them kind of rise the occasion of, they're having a 15-minute discussion student-led in Spanish, and then the next week they're in English having the same 15-minute discussion. And it's so cool to see them be able to interact with both languages. I think the materials are awesome because the words are well translated. Now the slides and the simulations are translated, which is awesome. That's like a big change. It's been really helpful to keep like the continuity throughout. Before it was like we would teach something in Spanish and then everything would be in English still. So that was really awesome that's been a change this year for Amplify, and exciting for the students to interact with.
I love that. What you didn't come from a place of we want them to only learn it in Spanish. You're encouraging that that academic Spanish for them, and even though they get it spoken at home, they increase their Spanish knowledge in your classroom. And I can't even imagine doing it in the English and then moving over to the Spanish. That's just so impressive that your students are able to transition through that.
Yeah, and it also allows them, thinking about it too now, to go home and share the stories with their parents who may or may not understand the English words of the science that they're doing. So being able to go and explain that, I think, really brings science alive in the home as well, which is great.
Yeah, that really bridges the gap from the home to the classroom. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So we don't have any more questions on these slides, but before we go, do you have any remote learning tips for teachers out there? We put you on the spot, so.
Yeah, no, I thought about it. I mean, as I've been trying to think about it, we've been a week out now. My biggest thing I'm thinking about is less is more. Giving students an opportunity to engage with the science, giving them opportunities to use what they know in the world around them and to question. I'm just going to be focusing on keeping my students curious, engaging with some of the grade level DCIs in the best way we can, but just reminding them that every day they're scientists if they can just question and think critically, and just finding ways to allow them to practice those skills.
That's great. Thank you so much for that tip, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. Like I said in the beginning, if you are not in our Facebook group right now, please join and connect with amplifiers and Amplify teachers. And we will see you again next week for another Amplify, Hear from Amplify Educator webinar. Bye.